You probably picture medieval humans as miserable people with rotting teeth, surviving on whatever scrap of food they could find. But the physical evidence proves the exact opposite. When researchers examined skulls from a 13th-century English village called Wharram Percy, they found cavity rates under 8%. Today, you are practically guaranteed to need dental work at some point in your life. Those medieval peasants kept their teeth pristine without modern medicine, entirely because their daily survival relied on a diet missing the one ingredient you consume every single day. Before that white powder conquered the world, the medieval food engine ran on a very different kind of biological fuel. The historical record, stretching from the dirt of peasant farms to a surviving recipe manuscript owned by King Richard II, exposes exactly how they survived. It reveals the heavy carbohydrates that kept them walking, the desperate ways human biology hunted for sweetness in the wild, and a sweeping illusion about sugar that was strictly reserved for the absolute elite. Erase the image of the medieval banquet from your mind. The roasted boars and silver platters were a total fiction for most of the population. If you were a farmer in 13th-century England, your existence relied on a brutal mathematical reality. Working a 14-hour shift in the dirt meant you burned up to 4,000 calories a day. Missing that target meant starvation. And to hit those numbers, your body ran almost entirely on gray, heavy, unrefined carbohydrates. The foundation of everything was bread, but it looked nothing like what you buy today. Peasants baked a dense, dark block called maslin, mixing rye, barley, and sometimes ground beans. Meanwhile, the rich paid exorbitant prices for manchi, a soft white bread made from finely sifted wheat. By paying gold to strip all the fiber and nutrients out of their food, the elite accidentally weakened their own immune systems. The poorest workers, forced to eat the cheap dark grain, walked away with a biological shield. You rarely ate that bread dry. You broke it over the absolute center of the medieval diet, a boiling sludge called pottage. Forget the internet myth of a perpetual stew bubbling away for years with rotting meat. Pottage was cooked fresh daily. It was a thick porridge of oats, peas, beans, and root vegetables pulled straight from the soil. Protein was a luxury. Hunting in the local forests was illegal, so meat was usually just a small piece of salt-cured pork, saved for the dead of winter. They washed this down with small beer, a weak, cloudy ale brewed constantly because drinking surface water near livestock could kill you. Men, women, and children drank this throughout the day, securing another layer of liquid calories. But this heavy, repetitive diet created a physical side effect that shocked modern bioarchaeologists. When researchers look at skulls from sites like Wharram Percy, they do not just see teeth without cavities. They see teeth ground completely flat. Because medieval millstones were imperfect, microscopic pieces of rock broke off into the flour. Every time a peasant ate bread, they were literally chewing sand. Over the years, this rock grit acted like natural sandpaper. It wore their teeth down, but it scrubbed away plaque before cavities could ever take root. This gray fuel kept their hearts beating and their jaws strong. But human biology demands more than just survival. The brain is hardwired by evolution to seek out quick, explosive energy. A bowl of boiled beans gives you life, but it does not give you dopamine. Completely cut off from the refined sugar of the East, that biological craving drove them to hunt for sweetness in very specific hidden places. When your brain demands a dopamine spike today, you walk to a pantry and open a wrapper. The transaction takes 5 seconds. A 13th-century farmer had the exact same nervous system and the exact same chemical craving. But satisfying it was not a transaction. It was a seasonal, labor-intensive hunt. You might assume they just ate fruit, but if you bit into a wild apple in 1250, you would probably spit it out. Modern fruits have been engineered over centuries to grow large and pack heavy loads of fructose. Native European apples, pears, and wild berries were small, hard, and intensely sour. To get any real sweetness out of them, families had to use fire. They buried hard apples in hot ash or boiled berries for hours, forcing the heat to break down the cellular walls and release whatever tiny amount of natural sugar was trapped inside. But cooked fruit only goes so far. The only source of pure, concentrated sweetness available to the working class was honey, and harvesting it looked nothing like modern beekeeping. Historian Eva Crane's research on early apiculture shows that medieval people did not have wooden boxes with sliding frames. Families with a bit of land kept bees in a skep. A skep was an upside-down basket woven from straw and sealed with mud. You placed it in a corner of your yard and waited, hoping a wild swarm would move in. Because the bees built their comb directly attached to the inner straw walls, you could not simply pull out a neat tray of honey. Harvesting meant waiting until the end of summer, driving the aggressive bees out with smoke, and physically crushing the entire comb. It was a messy, destructive process that yielded just a few jars of liquid gold. Here is the economic reality that usually gets left out. The church demanded pure beeswax for altar candles. Wax was the actual cash crop. The honey was just a sticky byproduct left over for the family to scrape up and consume. Look at the scale of that contrast. Today, the average person consumes over 70 pounds of added sugar a year. A medieval peasant might consume a few ounces of honey in that same 12 months. Sweetness was never a casual snack. It was a rare physical experience, saved to celebrate a wedding, survive a winter freeze, or soothe a sick child. This intense scarcity makes perfect biological sense until you check the trade logs from the 1300s. Refined white cane sugar actually did exist in England at this exact moment. It was sitting right there inside the country borders. But if you wanted to find it, you did not go to a bakery, and you certainly did not go to a farm. You went to a completely different and far more expensive kind of professional. If you walked into London in the 1300s looking for sugar, going to a food market would be a waste of time. You had to go to an apothecary. Sugar was imported at unimaginable cost by Venetian merchants, traveling along grueling trade routes from Cyprus and the Middle East. At this point in European history, society did not classify it as a food ingredient. It was categorized on the same shelf as gold dust, ambergris, and rare spices. Medical science at the time relied entirely on the theory of the four humors, the belief that human health depended on balancing internal fluids. Doctors classified sugar as a powerful chemical agent. If you had a severe chest cough, a fever, or a stomach illness, a wealthy physician might prescribe a tiny, precisely measured pinch of white sugar to manually balance your internal chemistry. It did not come in loose granules. It was sold in rock-hard, tightly packed cones called sugar loaves. Buyers had to use specialized heavy iron nippers to violently break off a usable chunk. It was so astronomically expensive that a single pound of it could cost the equivalent of a working man's wages for over 3 months. For a peasant, eating sugar would be like you deciding to grate a solid gold bar over your dinner. But as the century progressed, the absolute upper tier of the nobility realized something. Eating a hyper-expensive medicine purely for pleasure was the ultimate display of financial dominance. And we know exactly how they consumed it, because the physical evidence still survives. Around 1390, the master cooks of King Richard II compiled a vast royal manuscript called the Form of Cury. This is not a bakery book. It is a terrifying look at upper-class dietary engineering. Out of more than 200 recipes, nearly half of them call for heavy doses of sugar. The royal chefs were taking huge, expensive cuts of pork, chicken, and fish, and completely drowning them in sweetness. They made dishes blending bone marrow, pine nuts, animal blood, and crushed sugarloaf. They did not stop at flavoring. They used it as a structural building material. Cooks boiled sugar down to build towering edible sculptures called subtleties. These were wheeled out during feasts. They built castles, ships, and mythical beasts made of pure sugar just to prove the king could afford to waste medicinal gold on a temporary table decoration that would be shattered and eaten minutes later. Look at the physical division this created. The poorest people in the country, chewing on dark rye maslin and eating bowls of boiled root vegetables, were unintentionally building an impenetrable biological shield. The total lack of refined sugar, combined with the extreme mechanical wear of stone ground flour, gave them the pristine, cavity-free jaws found at the Wharram Percy excavation. The elite, meanwhile, were paying vast fortunes to slowly destroy their own bodies from the inside out. They threw away the dietary fiber, demanded soft white bread, and aggressively spiced their meat with a corrosive powder. This royal obsession set a trap that would trigger a biological disaster. By the time we reached the Tudor era a few generations later, the consumption of sugar by the wealthy escalated so severely that having black, rotting teeth actually became a status symbol. It was literal, physical proof that you were rich enough to afford the white powder. The nobility paid gold to rot their mouths, while the peasants kept their teeth intact simply because they were locked out of the global spice trade. The medieval dietary engine was hard on the back, but incredibly safe for the human jaw. The barrier of extreme poverty accidentally protected millions of people from the damage of refined carbohydrates. But that barrier was never going to last. The real tragedy is not what the medieval kings did to their own teeth. It is what happened to the human machine when the global supply chain finally shifted, the plantations were built, and the king's private medicine became cheap enough for everyone else. When you look in the mirror today and see the dental work in your own mouth, you are looking at the direct consequence of that global shift. The medieval peasant we started with, buried at Wharram Percy with a pristine jaw, did not have better genetics than you. They were simply trapped in a system that forced their bodies to work as nature intended. Their entire existence was a brutal engine fueled by heavy maslin bread, daily vegetable pottage, and the rare, physically demanding hunt for wild honey in a backyard skep. We tend to look back at the 13th century with pity, imagining a dark era of nutritional misery. But the physical evidence forces us to rewrite that narrative. Extreme poverty created an accidental biological shield. It protected the working class from the corrosive luxury that royal chefs were crushing with iron nippers just to flavor the king's dinner. The moment that white powder stopped being a rare, exotic spice in the apothecary and became a cheap commodity in the grocery store, that shield shattered forever. The ultimate status symbol of the medieval elite, which was the ability to consume pure, concentrated sweetness every single day, became the standard baseline of the modern human diet. We now eat like medieval kings, and our bodies are paying the exact same physical price. When bioarchaeologists dig up our modern cemeteries 1,000 years from now, what do you think our skulls will tell them about what we valued most? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There are plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.